I am Basil Elton, keeper of the North Point light that my father and grandfather kept before me. Far from the shore stands the grey lighthouse, above sunken, slimy rocks that are seen when the tide is low, but unseen when the tide is high. Past that beacon for a century has swept the majestic barks of the seven seas. In the days of my grandfather, there were many. In the days of my father, not so many. And now there are so few that I sometimes feel strangely alone, as though I were the last man on our planet. From far shores came those white-sailed argosies of old, from far eastern shores where warm sunshine and sweet odors linger about strange gardens and gay temples. The old captains of the sea came often to my grandfather and told him of these things, which in turn he told to my father, and my father told to me in the long autumn evenings when the wind howled eerily from the east. And I have read more of these things, and of many besides, in the books men gave me when I was young and filled with wonder. But more wonderful than the lore of old men and the lore of old books is the secret lore of the ocean. Blue, green, gray, white or black, smooth, ruffled, or mountainous, that ocean is not silent. All my days I have watched it and listened to it, and I know it well. At first it told to me only the plain little tales of calm beaches and near ports, but with the years it grew more friendly and spoke of other things, of things more strange and more distant in space and in time. Sometimes at twilight the gray vapors of the horizon have parted to grant me glimpses of the ways beyond, and sometimes at night the deep waters of the sea have grown clear and phosphorescent to grant me glimpses of the ways beneath. And these glimpses have been as often of the ways that were and the ways that might be, as of the ways that are. For the ocean is more ancient than the mountains, and frightened with the memories and the dreams of time. Out of the south it was that the white ship used to come when the moon was full and high in the heavens. Out of the south it would glide smoothly and silently over the sea. And whether the sea was rough or calm, and whether the wind was friendly or adverse, it would always glide silently and smoothly, its sails distant, and its long, strange tiers of oars moving rhythmically. One night I espied upon the deck a man, bearded and robed, and he seemed to beckon me to embark for fair, unknown shores. Many times afterward I saw him under the full moon, and ever did he beckon me. Very brightly did the moon shine on the night I answered the call, and I walked over the waters to the white ship on a bridge of moonbeams. The man who had beckoned me now spoke to welcome me in a soft language I seemed to know well, and the hours were filled with soft songs of the oarsmen as we glided away into a mysterious south, golden with the glow of that full, mellow moon. And when the day dawned, rosy and effulgent, I beheld the green shore of far lands, bright and beautiful, and to me unknown. Up from the sea rose lordly terraces of verdure, tree-studded, and showing here and there the gleaming white roofs and colonnades of strange temples. As we drew nearer the green shore, the bearded man told me of that land, the land of Zar, where dwell all thoughts of dreams of beauty that come to men once and then are forgotten. And when I looked upon the terraces again, I saw that what he said was true, for among the sights before me were many things I had once seen through the mists beyond the horizon and in the phosphorescent depths of the ocean. there too were forms and fancies more splendid than any I had ever known. The visions of young poets who died in want before the world could learn of what they had seen and dreamed. But we did not set foot upon the sloping meadows of Zar, for it is told that he who treads them may never more return to his native shore. As the white ship sailed silently away from the templed terraces of Zar, we beheld on the distant horizon ahead the spires of a mighty city. And the bearded man said to me, "This is Thalarion, the city of 1,000 wonders, wherein reside all those mysteries that man has striven in vain to fathom." And I looked again at closer range and saw that the city was greater than any city I had known or dreamed of before. In the sky, the spires of its temples reached, so that no man might behold their peaks, and far beyond the horizon stretched the grim gray walls, over which one might spy only a few roofs, weird and ominous, yet adorned with rich friezes and alluring sculptures. I yearned mightily to enter this fascinating yet repellent city, and besought the bearded man to land me at the stone pier by the huge carven gate Akariel. But he gently denied my wish, saying, "To Thalarion, the city of 1,000 wonders, many have passed, but none returned. Therein walk only demons and mad things that are no longer men, and the streets are white with the unburied bones of those who have looked upon the Eidolon Lathi that reigns over the city." And so the white ship sailed on past the walls of Thalarion, and followed for many days a southward flying bird whose glossy plumage matched the sky out of which it had appeared. Then we came to a pleasant grey coast with blossoms of every hue, where as far inland as we could see basked lovely groves and radiant arbors beneath a meridian sun. From bowers beyond our view came bursts of song and snatches of lyric harmony interspersed with faint laughter so delicious that I urged the rowers onward in my eagerness to reach the scene. And then the bearded man spoke no word, but watched me as we approached the lily-lined shore. Suddenly a wind blowing from over the flowering meadows and leafy woods brought a scent at which I trembled. The wind grew stronger, and the air was filled with the lethal charnel odor of plague-ridden towns and uncovered cemeteries. And as we sailed madly away from that damnable coast, the bearded man spoke at last, saying, "This is Zura, the land of pleasures unattained." So once more the white ship followed the bird of heaven, over the warm, blessed seas fanned by caressing aromatic breezes. Day after day and night after night did we sail, and when the moon was full, we would listen to the soft songs of the oarsmen, sweet as on that distant night when we sailed away far from my native land. And it was by moonlight that we anchored at last in the harbor of Sona Nil, which is guarded by twin headlands of crystal that rise from the sea and meet in a resplendent arch. This is the land of fancy, and we walk to the verdant shore upon a golden bridge of moonbeams. In the land of Sona Nil there is neither time nor space, neither suffering nor death, and there I dwelt for many aeons. Green are the roofs and the pastures, bright and fragrant the flowers, blue and musical the streams, clear and cool the fountains, and stately and gorgeous the temples, castles, and cities of Sona Nil. Of that land there is no bound, for beyond each vista of beauty rises another more beautiful. Over the countryside and amidst the splendor of cities rove at will the happy folk, of whom all are gifted with unmarred grace and unalloyed happiness. For the aeons I dwelt there, I wandered blissfully through the gardens where quaint pagodas peep from pleasing clumps of bushes, and where the white walks are bordered with delicate blossoms. I climbed gentle hills, from whose summits I could see entrancing panoramas of loveliness, with steepled towns nestling in verdant valleys, and with the golden domes of gigantic cities glittering on the infinitely distant horizon. And I viewed by moonlight the sparkling sea, the crystal headlands, and the placid harbor wherein lay our anchored white ship. It was against the full moon one night in the immemorial year of Tharp that I saw outlined the beckoning form of the celestial bird, and felt the first stirrings of unrest. Then I spoke with the bearded man, and told him of my new yearnings to depart for remote Cathuria, which no man hath seen, but which all believe to lie beyond the basalt pillars of the west. It is the land of hope, and in it shine the perfect ideals of all that we know elsewhere, or at least so men relate. But the bearded man said to me, "Beware those perilous seas wherein men say Cathuria lies. In Sona Nil there is no pain or death, but who can tell what lies beyond the basalt pillars of the west?" Nevertheless, at the next full moon, I boarded the white ship, and with the reluctant bearded man, left the happy harbor for untraveled seas. And the bird of heaven flew before, and led us toward the basalt pillars of the west. But this time the oarsmen sang no soft songs under the full moon. In my mind I would often picture the unknown land of Cathuria, with its splendid groves and palaces, and would wonder what new delights there awaited me. "Cathuria," I would say to myself, "is the abode of gods and the land of unnumbered cities of gold. Its forests are of aloe and sandalwood, even as the fragrant groves of Camoran, and among the trees flutter gay birds of sweet song. On the green and flowery mountains of Cathuria stand temples of pink marble, rich with carven and painted glories, and having in their courtyards cool fountains of silver, where purl with ravishing music the scented waters that come from the grotto-born river of Narg. And the cities of Cathuria are cinctured with golden walls, and their pavements are also of gold. In the gardens of these cities are strange orchids and perfumed lakes whose beds are of coral and amber. At night the streets and gardens are lit with gay lanterns fashioned from the three-colored shell of tortoise, and here resound the soft notes of the singer and the lutenist. And the houses of the cities of Cathuria are all palaces, each built over a fragrant canal bearing the waters of the sacred Narg. Of marble and porphyry are those houses, and roofed with glittering gold that reflects the rays of the sun and enhances the splendor of the cities as blissful gods view them from distant peaks. Fairest of all is the palace of the great monarch Dorieb, whom some say to be a demigod and others a god. High is the palace of Dorieb, and many are the turrets of marble upon its walls. In its wide halls many multitudes assemble, and here hang the trophies of all the ages. And its roof is of pure gold, set upon tall pillars of ruby and azure, and having such carven figures of gods and heroes that he who looks up to those heights seems to gaze upon the living Olympus. And the floor of the palace is of glass, under which flow the cunningly lighted waters of the Narg, gay with gaudy fish not known beyond the bounds of lovely Cathuria. Thus I would speak to myself of Cathuria, but ever would the bearded man warn me to turn back to the happy shores of Sona Nil, for Sona Nil is known of men, while none hath ever beheld Cathuria. And on the 31st day that we followed the bird, we beheld the basalt pillars of the west. Shrouded in mist they were, so that no man might peer beyond them or see their summits, which indeed some say reach even to the heavens. And the bearded man again implored me to turn back, but I heeded him not. For from the mists beyond the basalt pillars I fancied there came the notes of the singer and lutenist, sweeter than the sweetest songs of Sonanil, and sounding mine own praises, the praises of me, who had voyaged far under the full moon and dwelt in the land of fancy. So to the sound of melody the white ship sailed into the mist betwixt the basalt pillars of the west. And when the music ceased and the mist lifted, we beheld not the land of Cathuria, but a swift rushing, resistless sea, over which our helpless bark was borne toward some unknown goal. Soon to our ears came the distant thunder of falling waters, and to our eyes appeared on the far horizon ahead the titanic spray of a monstrous cataract, wherein the oceans of the world dropped down to abysmal nothingness. Then did the bearded man say to me with tears on his cheek, "We have rejected the beautiful land of Sonanil, which we may never behold again. The gods are greater than men, and they have conquered." And I closed my eyes before the crash that I knew would come, shutting out the sight of the celestial bird which flapped its mocking blue wings over the brink of the torrent. Out of that crash came darkness, and I heard the shrieking of the men, and of things which were not men. From the east, tempestuous winds arose and chilled me as I crouched on the slab of the damp stone which had risen beneath my feet. Then as I heard another crash, I opened my eyes and beheld myself upon the platform of that lighthouse from whence I had sailed so many aeons ago. In the darkness below there loomed the vast blurred outlines of a vessel breaking up on the cruel rocks, and as I glanced over the waist I saw that the light had failed for the first time since my grandfather had assumed its care. And in the latter watches of the night, when I went within the tower, I saw on the wall a calendar which still remained as when I had left it at the hour I sailed away. With the dawn I descended the tower and looked for the wreckage upon the rocks, but what I found was only this: a strange dead bird whose hue was of the azure sky, and a single shattered spar of a whiteness greater than that of the wave tips or of the mountain snow. And thereafter the ocean told me its secrets no more, and though many times since the moon has shone full and high in the heavens, the white ship from the south came never again. In London, there is a man who screams when the church bells ring. He lives all alone with his streaked cat in Gray's Inn, and people call him harmlessly mad. His room is filled with books of the tamest and most puerile kind, and hour after hour he tries to lose himself in their feeble pages. All he seeks from life is not to think. For some reason, thought is very horrible to him, and anything that stirs the imagination he flees as a plague. He is very thin and grey and wrinkled, but there are those who declare he is not nearly so old as he looks. Fear has its grisly claws upon him, and a sound will make him start with staring eyes and sweat-beaded forehead. Friends and companions he shuns, for he wishes to answer no questions. Those who once knew him as a scholar and aesthete say it is very pitiful to see him now. He dropped them all years ago, and no one feels sure whether he left the country or merely sank from sight in some hidden byway. It is a decade now since he moved into Gray's Inn, and of where he had been he would say nothing till the night young Williams brought the Necronomicon. Williams was a dreamer and only 23, and when he moved into the ancient house he felt a strangeness and a breath of cosmic wind about the grey, wizened man in the next room. He forced his friendship where old friends dared not force theirs, and marveled at the fright that sat upon this gaunt, haggard watcher and listener. For that the man always watched and listened, no one could doubt. He watched and listened with his mind more than with his eyes and ears, and strove every moment to drown something in his ceaseless poring over gay, insipid novels. And when the church bells rang, he would stop his ears and scream, and the grey cat that dwelt with him would howl in unison till the last peal died reverberantly away. But try as Williams would, he could not make his neighbor speak of anything profound or hidden. The old man would not live up to his aspect and manner, but would feign a smile and a light tone and prattle feverishly and frantically of cheerful trifles, his voice every moment rising and thickening till at last it would split in a piping and incoherent falsetto. That his learning was deep and thorough, his most trivial remarks made abundantly clear, and Williams was not surprised to hear that he had been to Harrow and Oxford. Later, it developed that he was none other than Lord Northam, of whose ancient hereditary castle on the Yorkshire coast so many odd things were told. But when Williams tried to talk of the castle and of its reputed Roman origin, he refused to admit that there was anything unusual about it. He even tittered shrilly when the subject of the supposed under-crypts, hewn out of the solid crag that frowns on the northern sea, was brought up. So matters went, till that night when Williams brought home the infamous Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred. He had known of the dreaded volume since his 16th year, when his dawning love of the bizarre had led him to ask queer questions of a bent old bookseller in Chandra Street, and he always wondered why men paled when they spoke of it. The old bookseller had told him that only 5 copies were known to have survived the shock edicts of the priests and lawgivers against it, and that all these were locked up with frightened care by custodians who had ventured to begin a reading of the hateful black letter. But now, at least, he had not only found an accessible copy, but had made it his own, at a ludicrously low figure. It was at a Jew's shop in the squalid precincts of Clare Market, where he had often bought strange things before, and he almost fancied the gnarled old Levite smiled amidst tangles of beard as the great discovery was made. The bulky leather cover with the brass clasp had been so prominently visible, and the price was so absurdly slight. The one glimpse he had had of the title was enough to send him into transports, and some of the diagrams in the vague Latin text excited the tensest and most disquieting recollections in his brain. He felt it was highly necessary to get the ponderous thing home and begin deciphering it, and bore it out of the shop with such precipitate haste that the old Jew chuckled disturbingly behind him. But when at last it was safe in his room, he had found the combination of black letter and debased idiom too much for all his powers as a linguist, and reluctantly called on his strange, frightened friend for help with the twisted medieval Latin. Lord Northam was simpering inanities to his streaked cat, and started violently when the young man entered. Then he saw the volume and shuddered wildly, and fainted altogether when Williams uttered the title. It was when he regained his senses that he told his story, told his fantastic figment of madness in frantic whispers, lest his friend be not quick to burn the accursed book and give wide scattering to its ashes. There must, Lord Northam whispered, have been something wrong at the start, but it would have never come to a head if he had not explored too far. He was the 19th Baron of a line whose beginnings went uncomfortably far back into the past. Unbelievably far, if vague tradition could be heeded, for there were family tales of descent from pre-Saxon times, when a certain Cneius Gabinius Capito, military tribune in the 3rd Augustan Legion, then stationed at Lindum in Roman Britain, had been summarily expelled from his command for participation in certain rites unconnected with any known religion. Gabinius had, the rumor ran, come upon a cliffside cavern where strange folk met together and made the elder sign in the dark. Strange folk whom the Britons knew not save in fear, and who were the last to survive from a great land in the west that had sunk, leaving only the islands with the raths and circles and shrines of which Stonehenge was the greatest. There was no certainty, of course, in the legend that Gabinius had built an impregnable fortress over the forbidden cave and founded a line which Pict and Saxon, Dane and Norman were powerless to obliterate, or in the tacit assumption that from this line sprang the bold companion and lieutenant of the Black Prince whom Edward III created Baron of Northam. These things were not certain, yet they were often told, and in truth the stonework of Northam Keep did look alarmingly like the masonry of Hadrian's Wall. As a child, Lord Northam had peculiar dreams when sleeping in the other parts of the castle, and had acquired a constant habit of looking back through his memory for half-amorphous scenes and patterns and impressions which formed no part of his waking experience. He had become a dreamer who found life tame and unsatisfying, a searcher for strange realms and relationships once familiar, yet lying nowhere in the visible regions of Earth. Filled with the feeling that our tangible world is only an atom in a fabric vast and ominous, and that unknown demons press on and permeate the sphere of the known at every point, Northam in youth and young manhood drained in turn the founts of formal religion and occult mystery. Nowhere, however, could he find ease and content, and as he grew older, the staleness and limitations of life became more and more maddening to him. During the 90s, he dabbled in Satanism, and at all times he devoured avidly any doctrine or theory which seemed to promise escape from the close vistas of science and the dully unvarying laws of nature. Books like Ignatius Donnelly's chimerical account of Atlantis he absorbed with zest, and a dozen obscure precursors of Charles Fort enthralled him with their vagaries. He would travel leagues to follow up a furtive village tale of abnormal wonder, and once went into the desert of Araby to seek a nameless city of faint report, which no man has ever beheld. There rose within him the tantalizing faith that somewhere an easy gate existed, which, if once found, would admit him freely to those outer deeps whose echoes rattled so dimly at the back of his memory. It might be in the visible world, yet it might be only in his mind and soul. Perhaps he held within his own half-explored brain that cryptic link which would awaken him to elder and future lives in forgotten dimensions, which would bind him to the stars and to the infinities and eternities beyond them. 'Tis a grove-circled dwelling set close to a hill, where the branches are telling strange legends of ill. Over timbers so old that they breathe of the dead, crawl the vines green and cold, by strange nourishment fed. And no man knows the juices they suck from the depths of their dank, slimy bed. In the gardens are growing tall blossoms and fair, each pallid bloom throwing perfume on the air. But the afternoon sun with its shining red rays makes the picture loom dun on the curious gaze. And above the sween scent of the blossoms rise the odors of numberless days. The rank grasses are weaving on the terrace and lawn, dim memories savoring of things that have gone. The stones of the walks are encrusted and wet, and a strange spirit stalks when the red sun is set. And the soul of the watcher is filled with the faint pictures he would fain forget. It was in the hot June time I stood by that scene, when the gold rays of noontime beat bright on the green. But I shivered with the cold, groping feebly for light as a picture unrolled. And my age-spanning sight saw the time I had been there, before flash like fulgury out of the night. When the last days were upon me, and the ugly trifles of existence began to drive me to madness, like the small drops of water that torturers let fall ceaselessly upon one spot of the victim's body, I loved the irradiate refuge of sleep. In my dreams, I found a little of the beauty I had vainly sought in life, and wandered through old gardens and enchanted woods. Once when the wind was soft and scented, I heard the south calling, and sailed endlessly and languorously under strange stars. Once, when the gentle rain fell, I glided in a barge down a sunless stream under the earth till I reached another world of purple twilight, iridescent arbors, and undying roses. And once, I walked through a golden valley that led to shadowy groves and ruins, and ended in a mighty wall, green with antique vines and pierced with a little gate of bronze. Many times I walked through that valley, and longer would I pause in the spectral half-light where the giant trees squirmed and twisted grotesquely, and the grey ground stretched damply from trunk to trunk, sometimes disclosing the mold-stained stones of buried temples. And always the goal of my fancies was the mighty vine-grown wall with the little gate of bronze therein. After a while, as the days of walking became less and less bearable from their greyness and sameness, I would often drift into opiate peace through the valley and the shadowy groves, and wonder how I might seize them for my eternal dwelling place, so that I need no more crawl back to a dull world stripped of interest and new colors. And as I looked upon the little gate in the mighty wall, I felt that beyond it lay a dream country from which, once it was entered, there would be no return. So, each night in sleep, I strove to find the hidden latch of the gate in the ivied wall, though it was exceedingly well hidden. And I would tell myself that the realm beyond the wall was not more lasting merely, but more lovely and radiant as well. Then one night in the dream city of Zakarian, I found a yellowed papyrus filled with the thoughts of dream sages who dwelt of old in that city, and who were too wise ever to be born in the waking world. Therein were written many things concerning the world of dream, and among them was lore of a golden valley, and a sacred grove with temples, and a high wall pierced by a little bronze gate. When I saw this lore, I knew that it touched on the scenes I had haunted, and I therefore read long in the yellowed papyrus. Some of the dream sages wrote gorgeously of the wonders beyond the irrepassable gate, but others told of horror and disappointment. I knew not which to believe, yet longed more and more to cross forever into the unknown land, for doubt and secrecy are the lure of lures, and no new horror can be more terrible than the daily torture of the commonplace. So when I learned of the drug which would unlock the gate and drive me through, I resolved to take it when next I awaked. Last night I swallowed the drug and floated dreamily into the golden valley and the shadowy groves. And when I came this time to the antique wall, I saw the small gate of bronze was ajar. From beyond came a glow that weirdly lit the giant twisted trees in the tops of the buried temples, and I drifted on songfully, expectant of the glories of the land from whence I should never return. But as the gate swung wider, and the sorcery of the drug and dream pushed me through, I knew that all sights and glories were at an end. For in that new realm was neither land nor sea, but only the white void of unpeopled and illimitable space. So, happier than I had ever dared hope to be, I dissolved again into that native infinity of crystal oblivion, from which the demon life had called me for one brief and desolate hour. Introductory note. The following very singular narrative or record of impressions was discovered under circumstances so extraordinary that they deserve careful description. On the evening of Wednesday, August 27th, 1913, at about 8:30 o'clock, the population of the small seaside village of Potawatomi, Maine, USA, was aroused by a thunderous report, accompanied by a blinding flash, and the persons near the shore beheld a mammoth ball of fire dart from the heavens into the sea, but a short distance out, sending up a prodigious column of water. The following Sunday, a fishing party composed of John Richmond, Peter B. Carr, and Simon Canfield caught in their trawl and dragged ashore a mass of metallic rock weighing 360 pounds, and looking, as Mr. Canfield said, like a piece of slag. Most of the inhabitants agreed that this heavy body was none other than the fireball which had fallen from the sky 4 days before, and Dr. Richmond M. Jones, the local scientific authority, allowed that it must be an aerolite or meteoric stone. In chipping off specimens to send to an expert Boston analyst, Dr. Jones discovered embedded in the semi-metallic mass the strange book containing the ensuing tale, which is still in his possession. In form, the discovery resembles an ordinary notebook, about 5 by 3 inches in size, and containing 30 leaves. In material, however, it presents marked peculiarities. The covers are apparently of some dark, stony substance unknown to geologists and unbreakable by any mechanical means. No chemical reagent seems to act upon them. The leaves are much the same, save that they are lighter in color and so infinitely thin as to be quite flexible. The whole is bound by some process not very clear to those who have observed it, a process involving the adhesion of the leaf substance to the cover substance. These substances cannot now be separated, nor can the leaves be torn by any amount of force. The writing is Greek of the purest classical quality, and several students of paleography declare that the characters are in a cursive hand, used about the 2nd century BC. There is little in the text to determine the date. The mechanical mode of writing cannot be deduced beyond the fact that it must have resembled that of the modern slate and slate pencil. During the course of analytical efforts made by the late Professor Chambers of Harvard, several pages, most at the conclusion of the narrative, were blurred to the point of utter effacement before being read, a circumstance forming a well-nigh irreparable loss. What remains of the contents was done into modern Greek letters by the paleographer Rutherford, and in this form submitted to the translators. Professor Mayfield of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who examined the samples of the strange stone, declares it a true meteorite, an opinion in which Dr. von Winterfeldt of Heidelberg, interned in 1918 as a dangerous enemy alien, does not concur. Professor Bailey of Columbia College adopts a less dogmatic ground, pointing out that certain utterly unknown ingredients are present in large quantities, and warning that no classification is as yet possible. The presence, nature, and message of the strange book form so momentous a problem that no explanation can even be attempted. The text, as far as preserved, is here rendered as literally as our language permits, in the hope that some reader may eventually hit upon an interpretation and solve one of the greatest scientific mysteries of recent years. E.N.B. L.T. June. It was a narrow place, and I was alone. On one side, behind a margin of vivid waving green, was the sea, blue, bright and billowy, and sending up vaporous exhalations which intoxicated me. So profuse indeed were these exhalations that they gave me an odd impression of a coalescence of sea and sky, for the heavens were likewise bright and blue. On the other side was the forest, ancient almost as the sea itself, and stretching infinitely inland. It was very dark, for the trees were grotesquely huge and luxuriant, and incredibly numerous. Their giant trunks were of a horrible green, which blended weirdly with the narrow green tract upon which I stood. At some distance away on either side of me, the strange forest extended down to the water's edge, obliterating the shoreline and completely hemming in the narrow tract. Some of the trees I observed stood in the water itself, as though impatient of any barrier to their progress. I saw no living thing, nor sign that any living thing save myself had ever existed. The sea and the sky and the wood encircled me, and reached off into regions beyond my imagination, nor was there any sound save of the wind-tossed wood and the sea. As I stood in that silent place, I suddenly commenced to tremble, for though I knew not how I came there, I could scarce remember what my name and rank had been, and I felt I should go mad if I could understand what lurked about me. I recalled things I had learned, things I had dreamed, things I had imagined and yearned for in some other distant life. I thought of long nights when I had gazed up at the stars of heaven and cursed the gods that my free soul could not traverse the vast abysses which were inaccessible to my body. I conjured up ancient blasphemies and terrible delvings into the papyri of Democritus. But as memories appeared, I shuddered in deeper fear, for I knew that I was alone, horribly alone, yet close to sentient impulses of vast, vague kind, which I prayed never to comprehend nor encounter. In the voice of the swaying green branches, I fancied I could detect a kind of malignant hatred and demoniac triumph. Sometimes they struck me as being in horrible colloquy with ghastly and unthinkable things which the scaly green bodies of the trees half hid from sight but not from consciousness. The most oppressive of my sensations was a sinister feeling of alienage. Though I saw about me objects which I could name, trees, grass, sea, and sky, I felt that their relation to me was not the same as that of the trees, grass, sea, and sky I knew in another and dimly remembered life. The nature of the difference I could not tell, yet I shook in stark fright as it impressed itself upon me. And then, in a spot where I had before discerned nothing but the misty sea, I beheld the Green Meadow, separated from me by a vast expanse of blue, rippling water with sun-tipped wavelets, yet strangely near. Often I would peep fearfully over my right shoulder at the trees, but I preferred to look at the Green Meadow, which affected me oddly. It was while my eyes were fixed upon this singular tract that I first felt the ground in motion beneath me, beginning with a kind of throbbing agitation which held a fiendish suggestion of conscious action. The bit of bank on which I stood detached itself from the grassy shore and commenced to float away, borne slowly onward as if by some current of restless force. I did not move, astonished and startled as I was by the unprecedented phenomenon, but stood rigidly still until a wide lane of water yawned betwixt me and the land of trees. Then I sat down in a sort of daze and looked again at the sun-tipped water and the Green Meadow. Behind me, the trees and the things that may have been hiding seemed to radiate infinite menace. This I knew without turning to view them, for as I grew more used to the scene, I became less and less dependent upon the five senses that had once been my sole reliance. I knew the green, scaly forest hated me, yet now I was safe from it, for my bit of dark bank had drifted far from the shore. But though one peril was past, another loomed up before me. Pieces of earth were constantly crumbling from the floating isle which held me, so that death could not be far distant in any event. Yet even then, I seemed to sense that death would be death to me no more. For I turned again to watch the Green Meadow, imbued with a curious feeling of secrecy, in strange contrast to my general horror. Then it was that I heard, at a distance immeasurable, the sound of falling water. Not that of any trivial cascade such as I had known, but that which might be heard in far Scythian lands, if all the Mediterranean were poured down an unfathomable abyss. It was toward this sound that my shrinking island was drifting, yet I was content. Far in the rear were happening weird and terrible things, things which I turned to view, yet shivered to behold. For in the sky, dark, vaporous forms hovered fantastically, brooding over trees and seeming to answer the challenge of the waving green branches. Then a thick mist arose from the sea to join the sky forms, and the shore was erased from my sight. Though the sun, what sun I knew not, shone brightly on the water around me, The land I had left seemed involved in a demonic tempest, where clashed the will of the hellish trees and what they hid with that of the sky and the sea. And when the mist vanished, I saw only the blue sky and the blue sea, for the land and the trees were no more. It was at this point that my attention was arrested by the singing in the Green Meadow. Hitherto, as I have said, I had encountered no sign of human life, but now there arose to my ears a dull chant, whose origin and nature were apparently unmistakable. While the words were utterly indistinguishable, the chant awakened in me a peculiar train of associations, and I was reminded of some vaguely disquieting lines I had once translated out of an Egyptian book, which in turn were taken from a papyrus of ancient Meroe. Through my brain ran lines that I fear to repeat, lines telling of very antique things and forms of life in the days when our earth was exceedingly young, of things which thought and moved and were alive, yet which gods and men would not consider alive. It was a strange book. As I listened, I became gradually conscious of a circumstance which had before puzzled me only subconsciously. At no time had my sight distinguished any different objects in the Green Meadow, an impression of vivid homogeneous verdure being the sum of my total perception. Now, however, I saw that the current would cause my island to pass the shore at but a little distance, so that I might learn more of the land and of the singing thereon. My curiosity beheld the singers had mounted high, though it was mingled with apprehension. Bits of sod continued to break away from the tiny tract which carried me, but I heeded not their loss, for I felt that I was not to die with the body, or appearance of a body, which I seemed to possess. That everything about me, even life and death, was illusory. That I had overleaped the bounds of mortality and corporeal entity, becoming a free, detached thing, impressed me as almost certain. Of my location, I knew nothing, save that I felt I could not be on the Earth planet, once so familiar to me. My sensations, apart from a kind of haunting terror, were those of a traveler just embarked upon an unending voyage of discovery. For a moment, I thought of the lands and persons I had left behind, and of strange ways whereby I might someday tell them of my adventurings, even though I might never return. I had now floated very near the Green Meadow, so that the voices were clear and distinct. But though I knew many languages, I could not quite interpret the words of the chanting. Familiar they indeed were, as I had subtly felt when at a greater distance, but beyond a sensation of vague and awesome remembrance, I could make nothing of them. A most extraordinary quality in the voices, a quality which I cannot describe, at once frightened and fascinated me. My eyes could now discern several things amidst the omnipresent verdure. Rocks covered with bright green moss, shrubs of considerable height, and less definable shapes of great magnitude, which seemed to move or vibrate amidst the shrubbery in a peculiar way. The chanting, whose authors I was so anxious to glimpse, seemed loudest at points where these shapes were most numerous and most vigorously in motion. And then, as my island drifted closer and the sound of the distant waterfall grew louder, I saw clearly the source of the chanting, and in one horrible instant remembered everything. Of such things I cannot, dare not tell, for therein was revealed the hideous solution of all which had puzzled me, and that solution would drive you mad, even as it almost drove me. I knew now the change through which I had passed, and through which certain others who once were men had passed, and I knew the endless cycle of the future which none like me may escape. I shall live forever, be conscious forever, though my soul cries out to the gods for the boon of death and oblivion. All is before me. Beyond the deafening torrent lies the land of Stethalos, where young men are infinitely old. The Green Meadow. I will send a message across the horrible, immeasurable abyss. There is a lake in distant Zan, beyond the wonted haunts of man, where broods alone in a hideous state a spirit dead and desolate. A spirit ancient and unholy, heavy with fearsome melancholy, which from the waters dull and dense draws vapors cursed with pestilence. Around the banks a mire of clay sprawled things offensive in decay, and curious birds that reach that shore are seen by mortals nevermore. Here shines by day the searing sun, on glassy wastes beheld by none, and here by night pale moonbeams flow into the deeps that yawn below. In nightmares only is it told what scenes beneath those beams unfold, what scenes too old for human sight lie sunken there in endless night. For in those depths there only pace the shadows of a voiceless race. One midnight, redolent of ill, I saw that lake, asleep and still, while in the lurid sky there rode a gibbous moon that glowed and glowed. I saw the stretching marshy shore and the foul things those marshes bore. Lizards and snakes convulsed and dying, ravens and vampires putrefying. All these, and hovering o'er the dead, sarcophagi that on them fed. And as the dreadful moon climbed high, frightening the stars from out the sky, I saw the lake's dull water glow, till sunken things appeared below. There shone unnumbered fathoms down the towers of a forgotten town, the tarnished domes and mossy walls, weed-tangled spires and empty halls, deserted fanes and vaults of dread, and streets of gold uncoveted. These I beheld, and saw beside a horde of shapeless shadows glide, a noxious horde which to my glance seemed moving in a hideous dance round slimy sepulchres that lay beside a never-traveled way. Straight from those tombs a heaving rose that vexed the water's dull repose, while lethal shades of upper space howled at the moon's sardonic face. Then sank the lake within its bed, sucked down to caverns of the dead, till from the reeking, new-stripped earth curled fetid fumes of noisome birth. Above the city, nigh uncovered, the monstrous dancing shadows hovered, when, lo, there oped with sudden stir the portal of each sepulchre. No ear may learn, no tongue may tell what nameless horror then befell. I see that lake, that moon a-grin, that city and the things within. Waking, I pray that on that shore the nightmare lake may sink no more. There is in the land of Mnar a vast still lake that is fed by no stream, and out of which no stream flows. 10,000 years ago, there stood by its shore the mighty city of Sarnath. But Sarnath stands there no more. It is told in the immemorial years when the world was young, before ever the men of Sarnath came to the land of Mnar, another city stood beside the lake, the grey stone city of Ebe, which was old as the lake itself, and peopled with beings not pleasing to behold. Very odd and ugly were these beings, as indeed are most beings of a world inchoate and rudely fashioned. It is written on the brick cylinders of Cadatharon that the beings of Ib were in hue as green as the lake and the mists that rise above it, that they had bulging eyes, pouting flabby lips, and curious ears, and were without voice. It is also written that they descended one night from the moon in a mist, they and the vast still lake and the grey stone city of Ebe. However this may be, it is certain that they worshipped a sea-green stone idol chiseled in the likeness of Bokrug, the great water lizard, before which they danced horribly when the moon was gibbous. And it is written in the papyrus of Ilarnec that they one day discovered fire, and thereafter kindled flames on many ceremonial occasions. But not much is written of these beings, because they lived in very ancient times, and man is young and knows little of the very ancient living things. After many aeons, men came to the land of Mnar, dark, shepherded folk with their fleecy flocks, who built Thra, Ilarnec, and Cadatharon on the winding river Ai. And certain tribes, more hardy than the rest, pushed on to the border of the lake and built Sarnath at a spot where precious metals were found in the earth. Not far from the grey city of Ebe did the wandering tribes lay the first stones of Sarnath, and at the beings of Ebe they marveled greatly. But with their marveling was mixed hate, for they thought it not meet that the beings of such aspect should walk about in the world of men at dusk. Nor did they like the strange sculptures upon the monoliths of Ebe, for those sculptures were terrible with great antiquity. Why the beings of the sculptures lingered so late in the world, even until the coming of men, none can tell, unless it was because the land of Mnar is very still and remote from most other lands of waking and of dream. As the men of Sarnath beheld more of the beings of Ebe, their hate grew, and it was not less because they found the beings weak and soft as jelly to the touch of stones and spears and arrows. So one day the young warriors, their slingers and the spearmen and their bowmen, marched against Ebe and slew all the inhabitants thereof, pushing the queer bodies into the lake with long spears, because they did not want to touch them. And because they did not like the grey sculptured monoliths of Ebe, they cast these also into the lake, wondering from the greatness of the labour how ever the stones were brought from afar, as they must have been, since there is naught like them in all the land of Mnar or the lands adjacent. Thus of the very ancient city of Ebe nothing was spared, save the sea-green stone idol chiseled in the likeness of Bokrug, the water lizard. This the young warriors took back with them to Sarnath, as a symbol of conquest over the old gods and beings of Ebe, and a sign of leadership in Mnar. But on the night after it was set up in the temple, a terrible thing must have happened. For weird lights were seen over the lake, and in the morning people found the idol gone, and the high priest Taran-Ish lying dead, as from some fear unspeakable. And before he died, Taran-Ish had scrawled upon the altar of chrysolite with coarse shaky strokes the sign of doom. After After Taran-ish, there were many high priests in Sarnath, but never was the sea-green stone idol found. And many centuries came and went, wherein Sarnath prospered exceedingly, so that only priests and old women remembered what Taran-ish had scrawled upon the altar of chrysolite. Betwixt Sarnath and the city of Ilanak arose a caravan route, and the precious metals from the earth were exchanged for other metals, and rare clothes and jewels, and books and tools for the artificers, and all things of luxury that are known to the people who dwell along the river Ai and beyond. So Sarnath waxed mighty, and learned, and beautiful, and sent forth conquering armies to subdue the neighboring cities. And in time there sate upon a throne in Sarnath the kings of all the land of Nar, and many lands adjacent. The wonder of the world and the pride of all mankind was Sarnath the Magnificent. Of polished desert-quarried marble were its walls, in height 300 cubits and in breadth 75, so that chariots might pass each other as men drave them along the top. For full 500 stadia did they run, being open only on the side toward the lake, where the green stone sea wall kept back the waves that rose oddly once a year at the festival of the destroying of Ib. With onyx they were paved, save those whereupon the horses and camels and elephants trod, which were paved with granite. And the gates of Sarnath were as many as the landward ends of the streets, each of bronze and flanked by figures of lions and elephants, carven from some stone no longer known among men. The houses of Sarnath were glazed brick and chalcedony, each having its walled garden and crystal lakelet. With strange art were they builded, for no other city had houses like them. And travelers from Thrar and Ilanak and Kedatharan marveled at the shining domes wherewith they were surmounted. But more marvelous still were the palaces and the temples and the gardens made by Zakar the old king. There were many palaces, the least of which were mightier than any in Thrar or Ilanak or Kedatharan. So high were they that one within might sometimes fancy himself beneath only the sky. Yet when lighted with torches dipped in the oil of Dorthur, their walls showed vast paintings of kings and armies of a splendor at once inspiring and stupefying to behold. Many were the pillars of the palaces, all of tinted marble, and carven into designs of surpassing beauty. And in most of the palaces the floors were mosaics of beryl and lapis lazuli, and sardonyx and carbuncle, and other choice materials so disposed that the beholder might fancy himself walking over beds of the rarest flowers. And there were likewise fountains, which cast scented waters about in pleasing jets arranged with cunning art. Outshining all others was the palace of the kings of Nar and of the lands adjacent. On a pair of golden crouching lions rested the throne, many steps above the gleaming floor, and it was wrought of one piece of ivory, though no man lives who knows when so vast a piece could have come. In that palace there were many galleries, and many amphitheaters where lions and men and elephants battled at the pleasure of the kings. Sometimes the amphitheaters were flooded with water conveyed from the lake in mighty aqueducts, and then were enacted stirring sea fights, or combats betwixt swimmers and deadly marine things. Lofty and amazing were the 17 tower-like temples of Sarnath, fashioned of a bright multi-colored stone not known elsewhere. A full 1,000 cubits high stood the greatest among them, wherein the high priests dwelt with a magnificence scarce less than of the kings. On the ground were halls as vast and splendid as those of the palaces, where gathered throngs in worship of Zo-Kalar and Tamish and Lobdan, the chief gods of Sarnath, whose incense-enveloped shrines were as the thrones of monarchs. Not like the icons of other gods were those of Zo-Kalar and Tamish and Lobdan, for so close to life were they that one might swear the graceful bearded gods themselves sate on the ivory thrones. And up unending steps of shining zircon was the tower chamber, where from the high priests looked out over the city and the plains and the lake by day, and at the cryptic moon and significant stars and planets and their reflections in the lake by night. Here was done the very secret and ancient rite in detestation of Bokrug, the water lizard, and here rested the altar of chrysolite which bore the doom scroll of Taran Ish. Wonderful likewise were the gardens made by Zokar the olden king. In the center of Sarnath they lay, covering a great space and encircled by a high wall, and they were surmounted by a mighty dome of glass, through which shone the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was clear, and from which hung fulgent images of the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was not clear. In summer the gardens were cooled with fresh odorous breezes skillfully wafted by fans, and in winter they were heated with concealed fires, so that in those gardens it was always spring. There ran little streams over bright pebbles, dividing meads of green and gardens of many hues, and spanned by a multitude of bridges. Many were the waterfalls in their courses, and many the lilied lakes into which they expanded. Over the streams and lakelets rode white swans, whilst the music of rare birds chimed in the melody of the waters. In ordered terraces rose the green banks, adorned here and there with bowers of vines and sweet blossoms, and seats and benches of marble and porphyry. And there were many small shrines and temples where one might rest or pray to the small gods. Each year there was celebrated in Sarnath the feast of the destroying of Ib, at which time wine, song, dancing and merriment of every kind abounded. Great honors were then paid to the shades of those things that had annihilated the odd ancient beings, and to the memory of those beings and of their elder gods was derided by dancers and lutists crowned with roses from the gardens of Zokar. And the kings would look out over the lake and curse the bones of the dead that lay beneath it. At first the high priests liked not these festivals, for there had descended amongst them queer tales of how the sea-green icon had vanished, and how Taran Ish had died from fear and left a warning. And they said from their high tower they sometimes saw lights beneath the waters of the lake. But as many years passed without calamity, even the priests laughed and cursed and joined in the orgies of the feasters. Indeed, had they not themselves in their high tower often performed the ancient and secret rite and detestation of Bokrug the water lizard? And 1,000 years of riches and delight passed over Sarnath, wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Gorgeous beyond thought was the feast of the 1,000th year of the destroying of Ib. For a decade had it been talked of in the land of Na, and as it drew nigh, there came to Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants men from Thra, Ilanak, and Kadatharan, and all the cities of Na and the lands beyond. Before the marble walls on the appointed night were pitched the pavilions of the princes and the tents of the travelers, and all the shore resounded with the song of happy revelers. Within his banquet hall reclined Nargis Hay, the king, drunken with ancient wine from the vaults of the conquered Nath, and surrounded by feasting nobles and hurrying slaves. There were eaten many strange delicacies at that feast. Peacocks from the islands of Nariel in the middle ocean, young goats from the distant hills of Implan, heels of camels from the Nazik desert, nuts and spices from the Sadathrian groves, and pearls and wave-washed mtal dissolved in the vinegar of Thra. Of sauces there were an untold number, prepared by the subtlest cooks in all of Na, and suited to the palate of every feaster. But most prized of all the viands were the great fishes from the lake, each of vast size and served up on golden platters set with rubies and diamonds. Whilst the king and his nobles feasted within the palace and viewed the crowning dish as it awaited them on golden platters, others feasted elsewhere. In the tower of the great temple, the priests held revels, and in the pavilions without the walls, the princes of the neighboring lands made merry. And it was the high priest Nai-Ka who first saw the shadows that descended from the gibbous moon into the lake, and the damnable green mists that arose from the lake to meet the moon and to shroud in sinister haze the towers and domes of fated Sarnath. Thereafter in those towers and without the walls beheld the strange lights of the water, and saw that the grey rock of Akurion, which was wont to rear high above it near the shore, was almost submerged. And fear grew vaguely yet swiftly, so that the princes of Alarnak and of Far Rockle took down, and folded their tents and pavilions, and departed for the river Ai, though they scarce knew the reason for their departing. Then, close to the hour of midnight, all of the bronze gates of Sarnath burst open, and emptied forth a frenzied throng that blackened the plain, so that all the visiting princes and travelers fled away in fright. For all of the faces of this throng were writ with a madness, born of horror unendurable, and on their tongues were the words so horrible that no hearer paused for proof. Men whose eyes were wild with fear shrieked aloud of the sight within the king's banquet hall, where through the windows was seen no longer the form of Nargis-Hai and his nobles and slaves, but a horde of indescribable green voiceless things, with bulging eyes, pouting flabby lips, and curious ears. Things which danced horribly, bearing in their paws golden platters set with rubies and diamonds containing uncouth flames. And the princes and travelers, as they fled from the doomed city of Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants, looked again upon the mist-begetting lake and saw the grey rock of Akurion was quite submerged. Through all the land of Na and the lands adjacent spread the tales of those who had fled from Sarnath, and caravans sought that accursed city and its precious metals no more. It was long ere any traveller went thither, and even then only the brave and adventurous young men of distant Phillonia dared make the journey. Adventurous young men of yellow hair and blue eyes who are no kin to the land of Na. These men indeed went to the lake to view Sarnath, but though they found the vast still lake itself and the grey rock of Akurion which rears high above it near the shore, they beheld not the wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Where once had risen walls of 300 cubits and towers yet higher, now stretched only the marshy shore. And where once dwelt 50 millions of men, now crawled only the detestable green water lizard. Not even the mines of precious metal remained, for doom had come to Sarnath. But half buried in the rushes was spied a curious green idol of stone, an exceedingly ancient idol coated with seaweed and chiseled in the likeness of Bokrug, the great water lizard. That idol, enshrined in the high temple at Alarnak, was subsequently worshipped beneath the gibbous moon throughout the land of Na.